Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Hey there, Jim.
Hey, Jono. How are you?
I'm doing great. We are barreling along. We are episode 221, season 2, episode 21. And I'm going to warn you right now, we're not reading chapter 21. We're reading chapper 22 of the Bullet Catch.
You said it because I immediately, I can't, this is beyond me now. I don't know why or how or anything. I just trust you implicitly like I always do.
We are continuing our theme of how to build a better magician, and it is an honor and a privilege to have these two guys on. I am actually a little surprised that they said yes. I don't know why, because they're both very approachable, but I posted something on Facebook and Tobias Beckwith kind of put an ad underneath it accidentally, and then he sent me a message saying, I didn't mean to put my ad for the magic school as part of your post. I'm very sorry. And I said, well, there's one way to, be forgiven. Can you and Jeff do the podcast? So we have, because of his typographical error, I think they would have done it anyway, as it turns out, we have Jeff McBride and Tobias Beckwith. These are guys who, like other teachers we've had, we've talked to Suzanne and Tyler Erickson recently, but these guys run an actual magic school.
Yeah, they really do. Jeff McBride founded the Magic and Mystery School in 1991. I attended it and was blown away by it. And in the conversation, I couldn't quite articulate what it was or what it was intended to be or what I experienced. It's just different than any other magic event that I have gone to. It was more than a show. It was more than a lecture. It was not a convention, but there were so many elements to it, and I just couldn't articulate what I was trying to say. Towards the end of the interview, Jeff McBride went, bang, it's this. And I went, that's what I've been trying to say for 25 minutes. And he just nailed it. So,
well, it is his school.
Exactly.
So he might know how to describe it.
But it's really, if you are a magician listening to this podcast and you have not gone to the mystery school, it's an eye opener. It's a really intense, cool, mind-blowing experience. And you should think about trying to get there at some point if you can.
And if you can't get there, you can get there virtually, which I imagine is not going to be the same experience, but you can still get some of that from these great teachers.
Yeah, and they are great teachers. Jeff McBride is phenomenal as a magician. And I think sometimes there's a difference. Like I took Tai Chi, and I took it with a really good friend of mine who's a martial artist. And he said to me, there were two teachers. And he said, the one teacher is a better Tai Chi practitioner. He's more fluid and he's got all of it down. I'm watching the weight distribution. He's the better of the two. But the other teacher, while he may not be as good a Tai Chi practitioner, he's a better teacher of it. He can articulate and explain it. Jeff has both those things. He is not only a brilliant magician, he has the ability to help you become a better magician. And that's what I experienced anyway at the mystery school.
We do dig into the principles behind the school in the interview, but as we often do with our guests, we started at the beginning to find out how they first got into magic. So let's just set a level here and ask about, where did each of you first begin to learn magic?
Jeff, well, I guess he didn't start before I did because I'm older than he is. But my first book was a book called The First Book of Magic, which was the first book I ever bought. I was 6 years old, first grade, and had learned to read enough. They said, you get to buy a book now. And they had these first book of the Revolution, first book of farming, and way down there was the first book of magic. And at the time, I thought they were talking about my idea of real magic. I thought I was going to be able to wave my hand and make it rain. And I got the book and I opened it up and I was so disappointed. It was just a bunch of tricks. But it took me 30 years after that to start to realize that tricks are about changing people's minds and giving you power. And at that point, I was already in the theater and met Bob Fitch, who was, you probably know Bob, was an actor on Broadway. I think he's done 27 Broadway shows, and a director and a dancer and choreographer. And he eventually introduced me to Jeff. and drew me back from the world of Broadway management and production into the world of magic and magicians, who I found vastly more interesting, because actors are concerned about their role and their audition and that's it. You ask them, yeah, but how do you feel? Well, I'm auditioning for so-and-so tomorrow. No, I don't. How are you? They can't answer it. Magicians are thinking about, well, I got to tell this kind of story, and this is happening in the world, so I can create magic around that, and people perceive, and suddenly it was a much more interesting crowd to hang out with than the Broadway actors and dancers and things I had been hanging out with for 10 years.
Jim, don't take offense. I know you're sometimes referred to as an actor.
I don't really consider myself an actor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Certainly not anymore for the purposes of this podcast.
Okay. Well, Jeff, where did you first start learning magic?
It was the first magic I saw in my life was all done by women. Strangely enough, there was these two twin girls, Susan and Linda Van Etten, that did card tricks, and they were younger than me, but they did four jacks as robbers and the hotel trick with the 4 piles of court cards, and they taught me these card tricks. And then my Aunt Joanna Rawson, who was the daughter of Clayton Rawson, the magician and mystery writer, who wrote a number of books, she performed, I think, the first magic trick I ever saw at my bedside. It was just, her taking her finger off. She promised if I stopped crying that she would teach me a magic trick. And she grew up in a magical family. Clayton Rawson wrote his magic books under the name of the Great Merlini, and that was actually my first magic book. And I didn't even know that I was like semi-related to this great mystery magician novelist.
That's kind of a weird coincidence.
I love when that happens. The coincidences are a sign that perhaps there's more that meets the eye, maybe, huh?
Well, I think that what we all have in common here is that we're all interested in magic and all interested in mystery. And that's, that's the thing that connects all of us from our diverse backgrounds. And I met Tobias through my pursuit of wanting to learn more theatrical magic. And I met Tobias because he was a friend of Bob Fitch, the great veteran Broadway actor, great magician, and they were working on a show together. And I wanted to learn more about theater. And so we all got together and started working on shows. And then years later, we got involved in the Magic and Mystery School because we wanted to spend time with really wonderful, enlightened magicians like Eugene Berger and Max Maven and Charles Reynolds, and people that were involved in magic on a much deeper level than just performing tricks. And that's where Tobias and I really connected. And Tobias, you were working Broadway shows. That's where you learned a lot of your, production skills and theatrical skills. Tobias also taught theater at the University of Pittsburgh. What was that like, Tobias?
Oh, that was fun. I had to give it up because I woke up one morning and realized that I was doing the thing I hated from professors, that I was teaching something I hadn't done professionally. And so I packed up and moved to New York City and learned more working in a box office and as general manager at the Fantastics, which was then in its 14th or 15th year, I think, running off Broadway, than I had in 6 years of college and 3 years of teaching. And that most of what I had learned didn't have much bearing on the real world and standards and things like that. So I didn't go back to school. I had gone there because I was going to go to NYU and finish my PhD. And after 2 or 3 months actually working in the theater, I had no desire to go back and finish the PhD.
And you were working on really high-level Broadway shows. I mean, the Fantastics was the longest running show. Oh, Calcutta was one of the longest running shows on Broadway. Yeah. And then you learned a lot about your craft from working Sweeney Todd.
Absolutely. I was a production assistant when they were still raising money, before it started rehearsals even. And then eventually did that all the way through the Broadway run. And they sent me out as a company manager for the first national tour. Wow. With Bill Lansbury and George Hearn. And so I learned a whole lot about the business and the art of being professional that I never understood, because I came in as an actor and director and thought, oh, I'm an artist, I don't need to know all that garbage about the finances. And it was only after actually being thrown into the fire and learning about the profession and the, how the fact that every artistic decision affects the bottom line, and every business decision affects what appears on the stage. And so it's all one big picture. And until you start seeing your business or your career that way, you're really an amateur. It's great. You love it. You would love doing the tricks, but you don't understand the bigger picture of what it's all about, how the art fits into the society, how the, how your biggest job is satisfying clients, not doing the best show you can for yourself. Yes, you want to do that, you get to do that, but the big job is creating the career, creating the thing that's useful in the world somehow.
One of the great stories that Tobias has of triumph over adversity is the balance of the show and the business. That's where Tobias really shines, because he's got this business savvy that he's learned from boots on the ground running successful Broadway shows. He's got the business, but he's also got the theatrical background. So he kind of knows the balance that it's both show and business. And not only does he teach courses in this, but this, and in these courses, Tobias tells this story about the early days of Sweeney Todd, this triumph over adversity. Could you tell that story about how it was like running into like severe problems? They were thinking like from the trajectory from just a couple of weeks before this thing opened. Tobias?
Absolutely. It was my dream. I was working with my heroes, Hal Prince, Stephen Sondheim, Richard Barr, and Charles Woodward, who Richard was president of the League of Producers at the time. And because I was driving Angela Lansbury back and forth to the theater as part of my work as the PA, I got to sit in and watch the rehearsals. And it was kind of a mess. Hal had just opened Evita in London, and he spent most of the time on the phone talking to the box office in London saying, why aren't we spending more tickets? Why aren't we doing this? Instead of watching the actors rehearse on the stage, he had an assistant running the rehearsal, doing the blocking, and halfway through, he said, oh, and we need this bridge that'll go up and down. It'll only be another $50,000. Well, this was in an era when Sweeney Todd was one of the biggest productions so far. It was $1 million production, and they didn't have another 50,000. So they had to go raise that on the way. But anyway, we got to previews, and I had seen it enough. I knew what was going on, and the actors but they got in there in front of the first audience. They had these razors where he cuts people's throats with and they were mechanical. They had CO2 cartridges in them. So the first night they get to the place where he cuts the first throat, and the blood spurts all the way to the back row of the theater, and everybody in the audience gets splattered. And some people are jumping out of their seats and running out going, I don't know what's going on, but it's the worst thing I've ever seen. And the show didn't make sense yet. But after that, they went into 10-hour-a-day rehearsals in 2 hours. And within 1 week, it became the show that won, 14 Tony Awards or something. Yeah. And a brilliant, brilliant piece of theater. But Hal knew enough after doing 30 hit Broadway shows. He said, I'm not going to know what the show's about until it gets in front of an audience.
Wow.
Which is, a great lesson for magicians. We don't know what the trick's about until the audience tells us either.
It's true. It's like, getting out in front of an audience is going to tell you more than, they'd say one live performance is worth 10 rehearsals in the studio. And, one of the things that we do at the Magic and Mystery School is we, encourage precision. And of course, we want students to rehearse and have good scripts and good technique. But we also, many magicians get into analysis paralysis. They want everything to be perfect. And as we learned from our master teacher, Eugene Berger, one of his favorite quotes was by Leonard Cohen from the song Anthem. And ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. And that's what lets the light in. So sometimes we have to dare to fail forward fast. We have to dare to go out there and do something. And we learn from it. And, we encourage the students to video and to send us video so we can go over the video and help them refine and make things better. But to get out there, boots on the ground, and do it and perform. Lance Burton says, it takes 1,000 shows to become a competent magician. 1,000 shows. And these days, I think people are so swept up in social media magic and kind of disposable bubblegum magic that they forget to go deep on things. And, back when I was working on my show, we did, 4 or 5 tricks thousands of times in front of audiences. Now, in the social media era on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, a magician will do a trick once, video it, and that's it.
Mhm.
And then it's on to the next thing. And that's really contrary to, the way I was taught martial arts, was the philosophy of Bruce Lee, that says, I fear not the man that knows 1,000 kicks. I fear the man that has practiced one kick 1,000 times.
Before you guys put together the Magic and Mystery School, were you taking on students or proteges and teaching them magic?
I've always taught magic. Even when I was in high school, I had students that wanted to study with me. So I've been teaching magic since the 70s, the mid 70s. And it's only, when you talk with other teachers, like one of our teachers at our school is Dr. Ricardo Rosenkrantz, who teaches magic and medicine program up at Northwestern University in Chicago. And he's a member of our senior faculty. And when, the doctors have a saying, see one, do one, teach one.
Mm-hmm.
When they're learning procedures, you have to watch it first, and then you do it, and then you teach it. You learn, I learned so much by teaching. I learned from my students. So in the act, I teach magic all day long. I am on Zoom from 9 o'clock in the morning till I have another appointment in 20 minutes. I have another class today. And I'm on like 6 hours at least a day doing, half an hour or hour lessons with magicians all over the world, watching their videos, giving them feedback, helping them get better, working on some of their strategies, working on some of their marketing and websites. So the more you do it, the better you get at it. But I learn so much every day from my students.
Absolutely.
Look, can we talk a little bit about the Mystery School now? Because in my experience, it is a very something can't be very unique, but a unique offering in the world of the magic community. It's not a convention. It's not a lecture. It's not. There's so many components. What was the genesis of it, or what was your thinking behind putting together a mystery school?
Well, it started, over 30 years ago. I wanted to spend time with Eugene Berger and really illuminated masters. And it was a way of me spending a week with these people, having them be our special guest, and them teaching not only their performance techniques, but the psychology and the philosophy and some of the underlying theory behind what they do. And we used to do it once a year, and that wasn't enough. So Tobias and I and Eugene Berger got together, and after 9 years of doing it once a year, we said, okay, let's create kind of an oasis of magic where magicians, no matter what their level, whether they're beginners in magic or they're intermediates or whether they're advanced pros, we can come out. And since we have a number of teachers, we can break the students into different groups of beginners, intermediate, and advanced, and rotate the groups. And we only work with small groups of up to 15. So Tobias will take 5 students. I'll take 5 students. One of the other master teachers will take 5 students, and we rotate the groups, giving them exactly what they need, both on the show and business level. And what a master class is, everybody calls everything a master class, but master class is a term that comes from music conservatories, where a student will perform a piece, and then the master teacher will help them make it better. So the essence of the teaching at a master class is you bring something you're working on, whether it is a single routine or a whole act, and we help you get better scripting, better blocking, better techniques, better music, better costumes, better business strategies to help level you up so you you can add an extra 0 to the end of your check for the show, or just become a better magician.
And certainly I saw all of that at the mystery school that I attended. I enjoyed every second of it, but there was in my memory of it, there was more to it than that. There was more than just sort of a hands-on, let me help you get this to a place where, and the other students watching, there were some mind-bending things there. There was some real stretching of us, not as performers necessarily, but as human beings. And there were field trips that we took to kind of open us up to other ways of thinking and doing things. It was just a really surprisingly effective way to shake us out of what we're normally doing or thinking about.
Yeah, well, magic at its very best, blows your mind. So
Yeah.
magicians who think they have it all under control need to have a mind-blowing experience. One of my favorite sayings is that you can't give somebody a gift that you don't have. So if a magician doesn't have a mind-blowing magical experience that's transformational, how can they give that to someone else?
Yeah.
And that's what we provide.
And was that always part of your thinking? Because now I remember the stories from friends of mine who attended mystery school early, that there really was a lot of sort of getting people to really open up and think differently and experience things that would blow their mind.
And and our program has changed over the years, and now is a program, and we have different programs. We have 1-day classes, we have 3-day classes, we have 7-day classes. Remember, we used to do it once a year,
Right.
and now we do it, continually on a regular basis. And many of our classes are on Zoom. Today we have a class starting on Zoom, a 3-day conference on inclusion and diversity. And we have mentalism classes, we have street magic classes, illusion. Tobias and I teach a thing called the Pro class, which is about show and business. And this is for people that are wanting to level up their professional business skills and also make their show better. And this is an online class that Tobias hosts, and I come in and I help people, with the show part, and he helps people with the theater and the business part of it. And it's a small group. We like to work in small groups. Back in the early days, when we only did it once a year, we had much larger groups. And now we've, over the years, dialed it in where we like to do smaller groups, like 5, 15 people, so we can really give people extraordinary amounts of individual attention and personal one-on-one time.
Let's talk a little bit about Eugene Berger, because you've mentioned him, and you mentioned that one of the impetuses for mystery school was for you to be able to spend some time with Eugene and learn from him, as so many of us did. Tell me his role and how you saw that, and how it all kind of fit together.
Well, he's the Yoda, he's the Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's the Gandalf, he's the Dumbledore. He is the ritual elder of the school. He is the wise man, and he empowered all of us to think deeper about our magic, and now that, Eugene's gone, Tobias kind of holds that role as our elder in the mystery school community, because Tobias was right there at the very beginning, and now is kind of taken that position on as the Yoda, as the Obi-Wan.
As has Larry. Larry is our he's picked up the philosophy, and I picked up the theatrical end of that.
Larry
Haas, who is
right,
school,
yeah,
and runs his Theory and Art of Magic Press, and is a wonderful performer as well and director. But he was a philosophy professor beforehand, so he's got that end of things really nailed down. But I think a big part of the school and what you're talking about is just that if you come to the Magic and Mystery School, you understand that you're in a community of people who think magic's important. It's not trivial. It's not just a bunch of tricks. It's an important way of dealing with life, as is theater, as our films are. It's an important art form, and probably more important than most people give it credit for. So and I think that's one of the reasons we have people who come back again and again. We do this mentalism class every year, And it's usually sold out for next year before they go home from this year,
Wow.
because it's that deeper community of, 15 or 18 people who go, wow, 15 or 18 people in the world who are as excited and passionate about this art form as I am.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that's a big part of what we offer. That's a little different than people who are, here's another way to do a double lift.
Yeah, they found their tribe.
Yeah.
No, not only that, but we get together with our students every Monday night for an hour online. Anyone that's a member of our online school, we get together for the past 11 years. We were streaming nearly 12 years ago, every Monday night.
Yeah.
For an hour. We have nearly 600 hours of and more of different episodes on every conceivable subject, and interviewed everyone in magic. And it's that consistency of feeding the tribe, of feeding the community, and creating a real oasis for them to come each and every week to reconnect. That it's not just an experience that you go do, a show that you go see, or a class that you take, or a lecture that you see, that there's continuity for a lifetime. I mean, people that have been coming to our school and coming to our classes have been coming for 30 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So in that 30 years, how has magic changed, and how do you see, how have magicians changed in that time?
Well, I mentioned it briefly before. I mean, I think we're living in the age of where magic is getting cannibalized and eaten up and spit out by these social media machines faster than it can be perfected. And I think people are much more fixated on creating content than art.
Mm. I would say, from my experience at Mystery School, that you have turned that on its head, that you are interested in creating art, or getting a magician or somebody at your school at least to think about it in those terms.
Yeah, we want the people to go deeper. I mean, there's nothing wrong with social media. It's just when when it's leading the economics of the magic community, that you have to read ads to buy social media magic, so you have a trick that week, so you can get clicks and likes of people that not even buying your product, just so you could have the more illusionary numbers at the end of your TikTok or something, that you have followers, that but it's not making a connection with anybody.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's clicks and likes aren't soul-filling, meaningful experiences.
We
And
talked about this a lot when we built Jeff's Zoom shows, because a lot of people were just doing their show like they're in front of a camera. I said, well, Zoom is kind of an opportunity to use a camera and reach a bigger audience, but it's interactive. They can feed back. And so Jeff built a show that was about telling stories, about involving the audience. Every piece had some kind of feedback from the audience. Do this, pick a card, do this, and exploring the medium, because it's an interactive medium.
Yeah.
For me, magic, yes, I love a movie that has magic in it. Yes, I love to see a magician, but it's not that experience that you get when you're live. Not that experience that, oh, it could go wrong. This is really happening. No, it could be CGI. It could be this or that. And so I think that's a big part of what makes it important for us, and that you don't get on YouTube or, TikTok or whatever.
Right. So what are you both excited about in magic these days?
I'm excited about the number of people who are excited about moving magic outside of entertainment alone. People like Joshua Jay's book on Thinking Like a Magician, or David Kwong's book, Spellbound. How are what we know, what we have learned, applicable to, well, for me, the world of startups. I'm interested in helping startups use magic to change people's minds, specifically in the climate change industries, the energy and things like that, because they need to change the public's minds in order to get us to behave differently if the planet's going to survive. Well, magic's good for changing people's minds. So sort of the premise of tricks are, oh, you think the world's this way? Well, think again. And it's more effective than just saying you need to change. So I'm excited about those outside applications. That's just for me personally. Jeff is much more immersed in the heart of performing and the art of magic than I am, so he'll have a different answer, I'm sure.
I like, we hear the term immersive so much, but that's actually what the very first mystery schools over 30 years ago were. They were immersive experiences where you were in the center of the experience instead of watching the experience out there. It wasn't a magic show or a lecture happening on a stage over there. I spent a lot of time at festivals, and I met my wife Abigail at a festival, and I go to Burning Man Festival and other conferences and festivals. And I'm working in January. We go live with one of our courses called Immersive Magic Theater, which is going to be interviewing and having teachers and innovators and trendsetters and influencers that are creating virtual reality experiences, immersive theater, participatory theater, environmental theater. There's so much of this going on in Vegas right now that the shows, the performance experience has to be immersive and totally sensual to stimulate all the senses. So magic is not just something you watch, it's something that you're inside of.
Well, now I'm excited about that. That just sounds
Well,
great.
we've always mystery school has always pushed the edge. You think mystery school and you think something ancient and archaic or maybe Victorian or something, but we've always been ahead of the curve technologically.
Fantastic. Jim, do you have any final questions?
Yeah, just because this book that we are letting the listeners hear is called The Bullet Catch, and it's about that trick is sort of at the center of this story that John has written. Do either of you have any thoughts on the trick, the bullet catch, or any hands-on experience with it?
Well, I think it's a metaphor for alchemy because the person that could catch the lead got the gold. So it's transforming a little tiny piece of lead into box office gold.
Box office gold. I think we're now up to the 21st episode, the bullet catch, and that's the best definition I've heard so far.
He nails so many things so perfectly and succinctly. Like I was trying to say all along what he said at the end, which is you are not watching something here at Mystery School. You are in the center of that experience. And that's what I was trying to say. You are not sitting passively. You are thrust into the middle of that experience. And it's mind-blowing sometimes, the things he has you do and the things he shows you. It was terrific.
There was so much gold in what we heard from Tobias and Jeff. My favorite thing that I've actually used since then in conversation is the idea of I fear not the man who knows 1,000 kicks. I fear the man who has practiced one kick 1,000 times. And that just makes so much sense.
That crazy Bruce Lee, he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, I guess he did. And the other thing they said that I just thought was fascinating was this whole social media thing, the idea of creating content and not creating art, and that the notion of clicks and likes are not truly meaningful experiences. And people seem to think they are, and they aren't.
Speak for yourself. I count on those clicks and likes. But yes, I agree with that completely. And you know what? 40 years ago, Eugene was saying the same thing. Eugene was saying the exact same thing. I remember a chapter in one of his pamphlets that said, if you're an artist and you want me to look at your work and you show me all of these half-done paintings, you're not an artist until you finish something. Right. And that's Jeff's point, which is just delve deeper and you'll be surprised at the amount of gold you can mine if you just keep digging.
Yeah. The other thing that I took away that surprised me, because I thought I did know, but I've just been confused by things online. But the idea of the masterclass, which now is, all over the internet, where you can take a masterclass with Aaron Sorkin if you want, and Jeff's definition of it, which is that's not a masterclass, that's a lecture. A masterclass is where you come in and you present something to a teacher and they work with you on it. That's a masterclass. And that reminded me of doing that with John Carney, where I presented the one trick that I do and the issues I had with it. And there were a bunch of other magicians around, and John spent 20 minutes, whatever, going over it with me and helping me make it better. And that's, I know you took a masterclass with John years ago, right?
I did, yeah. he was here for one of the Wizard weekends in Minneapolis. He was one of the performers and lecturers, and he offered a master class. And I really had nothing to show him because, as you know, I'm not really a magician. I sometimes play one, but I'm not really a magician. So I didn't really have anything to show him, but I took the master class just to be sort of in the room with the master. And it was eye-opening in terms of his ability to look at something and say, okay, but in such a kind, nice way, lead you to where your magic becomes stronger, more impactful, more mysterious, and more enjoyable for you as a performer, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was terrific. John Carney, if he's offering master classes and you're a magician and you can get in with Carney, whoo, sign up.
Well, and that's what they're offering at the Magic School. We're going to be talking to David Williamson in a couple episodes. He does that online now, one-on-one masterclass with David Williamson. I mean, it's such a great time to be able to take advantage of that sort of thing. And I will say that if you're interested in Jeff's school, there are some links in the show notes on how to get there, as well as some videos from the school, so that you'll get you all caught up on that.
Highly recommended. Great experience. Profound in terms of its sort of shattering of my own belief system and making me think outside my own box that I brought with me. He was great. It was great.
And speaking of profound, why don't we jump right now into chapter 22 of The Bullet Catch? That's a segue that I think I would be pulled over by the police and given some sort of citation for having.
You know where I was going? 22.
She likes 22.
Shocked to find out there's gambling going on in this.
Anyway, just to recap what happened last episode, we listened to two chapters, chapter 20 and chapter 21. They did the Bullet Catch shoot on the film set. We found out that who the intended killer was, and that person was arrested. They've had a bit of a celebration with the movie being wrapped, and Eli came home to find that Uncle Harry is very upset because his friend Max was dead. And that brings us right now into chapter 22.
The Bullet Catch, an Eli Marks mystery. Chapter 22. The wake for Max took place 2 days later at Adrian's. The bar had been such a long-time hangout for the members of the Minneapolis Mystics, it seemed the appropriate place to gather and say goodbye. I didn't see much of Harry during those 2 days. He spent every waking hour organizing the event. I think having the various tasks to focus on helped him to deal with the sudden loss of his friend. Due to the advanced age of most of the Mystics, it was decided an afternoon memorial would allow for the largest turnout. The owners of the bar were happy to pitch in, and a sign on the door announced the entire establishment was closed for a private event. Not having an official function, I planted myself near the front door, acting as the informal greeter. This allowed me to either steer people toward Harry, or if he looked too busy with other guests, to steer them toward the bar and the food. "I told you there'd be food." The voice was as familiar as her sentiment. I turned to see a tiny, white-haired woman pushing her way through a bottleneck that had formed by the front door. She was dressed for winter, even though it was close to 90 degrees outside. "And I also told you it'd be freezing in here," Franny continued, shouting over her shoulder. She spotted me, and we both broke into bittersweet smiles. "Eli, boy chick." I bent down to hug her, and she buried her face in my neck. "How is Harry doing?" she whispered. "He's holding up," I said. "He's doing good." "Good," she said, stepping back and giving me the once-over from head to toe. "I had another ping about you the other day. I don't often get twinges off the line, but this one was solid, and it was about you." "Another ping about me?" While I wouldn't go so far as to label myself a believer, Franny's predictions hit more often than they miss, even if they do land left of center from time to time. Her last prediction, that the man who got shot was the man who got shot, but he wasn't, seemed a fair, if garbled, description of what had happened to Jake on the film set. So I always kept my mind as open as I can for Franny's pings. Yes, I was washing the dishes last week, and I suddenly got an image of you and the words, "Stick to the lobby level." Does that make any sense to you? Yes, I said, yes, it does. Wow, that's nice, because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Now I know I smelled food, she continued, perching on her toes, in a failed attempt to see over the crowd. Even in a room full of tiny old people, Franny's diminutive stature still put her at a disadvantage. I pointed toward a table which had been set up by the far end of the bar. There's food back behind the bar, I said. Help yourself. There's going to be a short program starting in about 5 minutes. Quick, let's get food and find a seat before both are scarce, she barked over her shoulder. Her companion had been trapped in a bottleneck of walkers and canes by the door, and at that moment was finally able to maneuver her way into the room. It was Megan. We spotted each other at the same instant, and so were spared that fleeting moment of hesitation of what to do before the other person sees you. We stood, frozen in place for a second, and then simultaneously took a step toward each other. Eli, she said softly. Megan. We each took one more step, eliminating the small distance between us. We then negotiated a hug, with each of us turning first one way, then the other, until we managed to execute what had once been a simple and frequent action. We held each other for a moment longer than I expected, and so I used the extra time to get a quick waft of her hair. We then stepped back, standing closer than strangers, but not quite as close as lovers. Your hair smells the same, I finally said when no other thought was able to make the short jaunt from my brain to my lips. It does, she said, suddenly self-conscious. Well, I suppose it would, still using Johnson & Johnson baby shampoo. If it ain't broke, I said, as they say. Absolutely. Another awkward pause. It was nice of you to come, I finally said. I liked Max, she said, and I wanted to be here for Harry. How is he? He seems to be doing okay. He spent the last few days organizing all this, I said, awkwardly gesturing to the bar around us, which I think has been good for him. And how are you doing? You knew Max a long time. Leave it to Megan to ask the question no one else had raised, even me. Everyone had been so concerned about how Harry was taking the death of his friend, no one had thought to ask how I was feeling about it. To be honest, it hasn't settled in yet, I said. I've known Max forever. He taught me my first double lift, then spent the next 25 years criticizing me for the way I did it. Max was someone who was always there. So it will take a while for me to get used to a world where he's not. Megan was nodding along as I spoke, and I noticed tears had begun to form in her eyes. She closed the gap between us and gave me another hug, this one much more intense than the first. She then stepped back, wiped a tear away, and looked around the room. I'd better find Franny, she said hoarsely. Find the food, you'll find Franny. She smiled up at me. I'll see you later, she said, and then began working her way toward the far end of the bar. Not a bad turnout. I was adding more chairs to the back row due to the surprisingly steady flow of people who were streaming into the bar. I looked over to my left and was surprised to see Deirdre. She pulled a chair off the stack in the corner and handed it to me to add to the new back row I was attempting to create. Why did Harry decide to have the memorial here in the bar and not in the theater next door? I placed the chair she had given me and made room for the next one she was handing me, because there are too many seats next door at the theater. Excuse me? I set the chair and turned to her. It's a show business thing. Most performers would rather play to a small, full house than a large house with empty seats. Harry always says magic is more magical in a packed house. I'm surprised to see you here, I continued, straightening the row Deirdre had helped me create. I quickly calculated if it would be possible to add another row behind this one. Max performed at our wedding," she said, handing me another chair and readjusting my work to accommodate more people. "He was a crank, but a sweet crank." "That he was," I said. I leaned on the chair for a moment. I had forgotten that he was one of the performers at our wedding. How many magicians performed altogether? 8? 10. And a mime. I smiled at the memory. "Deirdre, you were very patient to have had that many magicians perform at your wedding." She shrugged. "That's the price you pay when you marry a magician. And speaking of marrying a magician, I saw your old girlfriend across the room. Is your new girlfriend coming as well?" "What new girlfriend?" "The widow LaSalle?" "She's not my girlfriend," I said, my voice nearly cracking. "I'd keep it that way if I were you until all the evidence is assembled." I took another chair from her but didn't set it down. "Is Trish actually a suspect? I mean, really?" "Maybe, maybe not. If you're wondering, do we have enough evidence to book her, the answer is no. Because if we did, we would have by now." "But in your mind, she's still a suspect?" Deirdre took the chair out of my hands and set it in place at the end of the new row. "Her biggest problem right now is what I call the last man standing syndrome. When just about everyone in her small circle is dead and there's not a scratch on her, that doesn't look good for her." "What about Mr. Lime? Did you track him down?" She shook her head. "The house where you met him is currently unoccupied and has been for months. The title search shows ownership belongs to about 20 different dummy corporations set up like Russian nesting dolls with nothing but air in the final doll." "But he exists," I said, a little more emphatically than I had intended. "Eli, I don't doubt he existed when you met him, but he's vapor now. For all we know, he's as dead as Dylan LaSalle and Howard and Sylvia Washburn." She made an unnecessary adjustment to the final chair. "Anyway, I'm going to go sit down." I recognized her tone from the latter days of our marriage, with her body language basically screaming, "I'm done talking about this." She walked to the other side of the room, even though we had jointly created 2 new, empty rows in front of us. I waved some latecomers in as Abe Ackerman took the small stage and began the process of us all saying goodbye to Max. I don't think I've ever felt so sad and laughed so much at the same time. I've only vague memories of my parents' funerals, and the service for Aunt Alice had been a somber occasion indeed. But for nearly an hour, performer after performer had taken to the small stage in the back of the bar and regaled us with their stories of Max Monarch, the man and the legend. Max even had the best seat in the house. His simple brass urn sat on a chair front and center. I was late to get seated and thought I might end up standing in the back when an arm waved me over. Megan had saved me a place on the aisle. I slid into the seat and whispered a thank you. She nodded, and I looked to see that Franny was next to her and Harry had taken a seat on the other side of Franny. He turned and gave me a wry smile, and then we all turned our attention back to the stage. The stories were personal, profound, and profane, and because they were being recounted by performers with decades of stage experience, each story was a small, polished gem. There were stories of USO tours where Max clashed with Bob Hope, standing ovations at the Magic Circle in London, and late-night card sessions with Orson Welles at the Magic Castle in Los Angeles. The final presentation came from the ventriloquist, Gene Westlake. He took to the stage with his longtime puppet companion, Kenny. Neither one said anything for a few moments, and then Kenny nodded to someone off stage. Recorded music began to play, and Gene and Kenny started singing Shuffle Off to Buffalo, each taking a verse and then, amazingly, harmonizing on the chorus. While they sang, photos of Max appeared on the screen behind them. It was miraculous watching a man's life pass before our eyes. morphing from a fresh-faced teen with a cowlick to a skilled and sophisticated performer. Without even turning toward me, Megan handed me a tissue and then pulled another one out of her purse and passed it to Franny. I dabbed at my eyes, and when I set my hand back down, Megan took it and gave it a squeeze. She turned to me and smiled a sad smile, which I returned. I looked past her to see that Franny had gently taken Harry's hand and was rubbing it delicately. The two hands, with their matching age spots, looked good together. After all the performers were through, Harry stood up and walked slowly to the stage. He looked a bit wobbly, and I almost jumped up to help him make the final step up to the platform, but he made it okay on his own. He stood center stage for a long moment, squinting up at the stage lights I had set up that afternoon, and then he finally spoke. "The first words Max Monarch said to me were, 'You know you're doing that wrong.'" This produced a knowing chuckle from the crowd. Harry waited for the laugh to subside and then continued, "I, of course, disagreed with him, and we continued that argument in one form or another for nearly 50 years. I will miss it, and I will miss him." Harry reached into his coat pocket and produced a magic wand. Even from where I was sitting, I could see this wand had some miles on it and would have benefited from a new coat of paint and some spit and polish. As he held the wand in front of him, I suddenly realized what he was going to do. "This is the broken wand ceremony," I whispered to Megan next to me. She nodded, although I suspect she had no idea what I was talking about. "The magic wand," Harry began to recite, holding and turning it for the audience, "is one of the oldest known totems. Primitive cave paintings have been found showing early man holding wand-like objects. In the world of conjuring and conjurers, the wand is considered to be an extension of the magician, part of him and part of his magic. When the magician dies, so does the magic in the wand. It ceases to hold meaning and becomes what it once was, a simple piece of wood." With a sudden move, Harry snapped the wand in half. The action was so unexpected, several people in the audience gasped. "Today, we will lay our friend Max to rest, and with him will go the remains of the wand, which is also now finally at rest. It is our sincere hope Max, wherever he may be, is at peace." Harry looked down at the urn in the front row. "Goodbye, my friend. Looks like you found the one and only way to win our ongoing argument." Organizing the funeral procession took longer than expected, due in part, I think, to the advanced age and diminished driving skills of many of the attendees. Eventually, though, all the cars were lined up and ready to go, although to the casual observer, most of the cars appeared to be driverless. It was only after looking more closely that you'd spot the gray hairs, oversized glasses, and squinting eyes creeping up from behind the steering wheels. Once everyone was ready, Harry sat next to me in my car with Max's urn on his lap. The motorcycle cop who was to lead the procession surveyed the group and started to mount his cycle, suggesting we were finally ready to go. "Wait a second, I almost forgot," Harry yelled as he unsnapped his seatbelt. "Buster, I can't believe I almost forgot," he repeated as he shoved Max's urn into my lap. I struggled to grasp it as Harry opened the passenger door and quickly climbed out. Once out of the car, he waved to the motorcycle cop and ran toward him. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but Harry handed the cop a sheet of paper and then executed a series of gestures. He pointed at the paper, pointed at the street ahead of us, he pointed at the procession behind us, and then again pointed at the piece of paper. It must have made sense to the cop, for he nodded and then sat for a moment studying the paper while Harry returned to the car. "What was that all about?" I asked as Harry climbed back in and shut the door. "I worked out a special route for the procession," Harry said as he snapped his seatbelt in place, "in honor of Max. I handed the urn back to him. What's so special about the route? Funeral processions get to run red lights, he said, smiling for the first time in 2 days. So I worked out a route that would allow us to run the maximum number of red lights between here and the cemetery. I thought Max would get a kick out of it. The motorcycle cop gave us all a wave, and the procession pulled away from the curb and began our short journey to Lakewood Cemetery. In all, we ran 17 red lights. I suspect Max would have loved it.
Running red lights in a funeral procession. I believe the joke that sort of inspired me to even think about that was from Dennis Miller.
I think the single most frustrating aspect of driving is the red light. You spend your whole life stopping at red lights. Then at the end, there's a very cruel irony. When you die, they let your funeral procession run the red lights on the way to the cemetery. You know, because when you're dead, it's important that you make good time, huh? Well, I'm dead, but I'm early.
But I just really liked that idea of throughout the book, Max is complaining about all the red lights, which is something my father used to do all the time, about how they would change the timing of the red lights, and he gets to run the red lights in his procession. And I'll also mention that Franny was supposed to die in the last book, and I'm really glad she didn't, because she's proven to be a fan favorite.
Fan favorite.
Yeah. So
yeah, we're glad Franny didn't die. Don't kill the ones we like, John. Don't kill our darlings.
We don't. That's one of the important rules of mystery writing, is don't kill the ones they like. Next episode, we're going to take a little detour, but it's a fun detour. We're going to take a turn into one of the other of the variety arts, magic being a variety art, ventriloquism being a variety art, juggling being a variety art, and the art of impressions with impressionist Jim Meskimen.
He is a phenomenal impressionist. If you have not heard or seen him, and here's the deal, you probably have heard or seen him, you just don't know it, because not only is he doing, kind of stand-up impressions like you might see or are used to seeing, he also is hired to impersonate a person's voice when that person is unavailable for some reason. And he has it down. It's great.
Yes. He mentioned in passing that he does some lines for Colin Firth in the trailer for 1917. And if I'm a smart person, next time I'll put a link up to that. You can't tell which is him and which is Colin Firth as a narrator. It's amazing. I first ran into Jim Meskimen on TikTok and was really impressed with the videos. He puts up lots of videos, and he does everybody. He does people you'd never think of. And I asked him to record a little ad for the Eli Mark series, and he was happy to do it as Peter Falk doing Columbo. Let's just take a moment and listen to that.
Okay, geez, you know what? I almost forgot. One more thing. I don't want to take up too much of your time. It just occurred to me, if you like mysteries that are both fun and funny, well, I think you're going to really like the Eli Marks mystery series. Mrs. Columbo, she just raves about him. Anyway, sorry to bother you.
Is that great or what? Nicely done, John. That was a brilliant idea. Of course, we're both huge Peter Falk fans, so that makes it all the better.
Yes, that is next episode with the fantastic and fun Jim Meskimen. Thanks again to Jeff McBride and Tobias Beckwith for chatting with us about the Magic Mystery School. Check out the show notes for videos and links. That'll tell you more about what's available for you there. Other than that, we will see you next time with Jim Meskimen. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, folks.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at elimarksmysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.